Hey guys, I have recorded an entire video, and halfway through the video I realized that my microphone was muted, so I guess I'll have to repeat myself for the next 20-30 minutes. But hey, I'm Xanthus. I've been playing Berserkers Technique for 2 or 3 months now, ever since Vicus came out on the Western servers, and I've absolutely loved every single day of this playstyle. And I thought, with the increasing popularity of the playstyle, with the prices being extremely high on Mayhem, with the Korean patch coming into the Western audience or the Western servers, a lot of people are actually questioning and realizing, well, should I try Berserker's Technique? Is it better? How does it feel? What are the options? What are the engravings? What are the stats? What are the gems? How is the playstyle? How you feel the meter? How quickly you feel the meter? I will just make a very, very long, very, very detailed, advanced Berserker's Technique guide. The original recording I wanted to do had all the basics and all the little tiny details, but I think this is going to be a little bit more advanced. I'm not going to talk about some of the obvious things, like which skills you should run. It's obviously these main DPS skills and so on. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into the video. The first thing when you're choosing Berserker's Technique, you need to choose between two relic sets. You have Dominion and you have Salvation, which is right here. Now, I can quickly tell you the differences between the two, and it's completely up to you which one you prefer. So, the first one is the Salvation mode. The Salvation is essentially the highest burst possible in Berserker's Technique mode. There's no higher burst damage output than this build in particular. Now, the way it works is you are allowed to use your second awakening skill inside the burst mode for an insane amount of damage, right? So if you like to see this in your raids, right, that's not fully stacked. This thing is supposed to be to 20 stacks, sorry. You're probably wondering, how is this guy hitting so low? He's such a noob. Why is he even making videos? If you want to see these numbers, solid, juicy 30-70 million. You buff that by Paladin, you pop an Adderfiend, you know, the classic combination of drugs, and then you hit for 130 million and you make a thumbnail and you call it a day, right? If you like big numbers, Salvation is your best friend. The way you build Salvation is you build 5 main DPS engravings, plus including Berserker's Technique, and that's basically your build. I have Spirit Absorption here to simulate the fact that I have a Yearning set, you know, just to make the video a little bit more fair for a real world scenario. But essentially, if you're running Salvation, you just put 5 DPS engravings and call it a day. It's very, very simple. The only real variance that you have is you can replace Cursed Dull with Increased Mass, because as you can see, when you get 20 stacks in Salvation, you get this tiny little concentrate little icon, which gives you 10% attack speed. So it basically can nullify the downside of Increased Mass. Therefore, increased mass engraving is relevant and reliable and viable for Salvation users, not Dominion users in particular. So you can replace Cursed Dull with increased mass. Gems are going to be relatively the same as Mayhem. The only thing that changes is you replace Sword Storm, I believe, with the Bloody Rush, because there's no Sword Storm here, as you can see, and everything else remains the same. You put damage and cooldown on all of these DPS skills, and that's how you play Salvation. Again, if you like big, chonky awakenings, big numbers, that one didn't crit, and that's what can happen in a real fight. It can happen. These disasters can happen. You cannot crit sometimes. It's a high risk, high reward kind of build. If you miss your abilities, if you miss your awakening, if awakening doesn't crit, like in this perfect example, that's actually a perfect example for the video, Salvation is going to be performing less. And it entirely depends on the person piloting the build to execute it at the fullest potential. The second one we have is a more beginner-friendly, quote-unquote beginner-friendly. That does not mean that this isn't a worse version of the two. Dominion is very simple. All you have to do to play Dominion is you use Chain of Vengeance, and I'll explain why. And you essentially use Awakening Engraving instead of one of the DPS skills. So let's say instead of Cursed Dull or Raid Captain, doesn't matter which one, you would be using Awakening instead. And that would be your setup, right? It would be Grudge, Keen Blend, Berserker's Technique, Cursed Dull, or Raid Captain, doesn't matter which one. And Awakening would be your 5x3 option. Now, think of every class as burst or consistency. Reflux, Sork, consistent damage. Ignition, burst damage. Red Gun Lancer, burst. Blue Gun Lancer, consistent. Berserker's technique is burst, Mayhem is more consistent. So Berserker's technique in an essence is a burst playstyle. However, the minion set brings it more towards consistency for the buffs that are displayed on your screen. It gives cooldown reduction on all your skills, right? So we're looking at 29-second strike wave right now. If I pop my awakening, I go into inner awakening mode, all of a sudden the cooldown becomes 24 seconds. So it's a lot more consistent. It's a little bit spammier, as people like to say. You're a lot more forgiven for missing your abilities. It's not the end of the world if you miss your abilities, simply because you have cooldown reduction inside this inner awakening mode. You have to maintain this inner awakening mode, however, therefore, you have to run awakening engraving. And this is a weird perception that people think that the minion is overall just worse simply because you run awakening, therefore you lose an entire engraving worth of damage. Yes and no. Because yes, you're losing a whole engraving. Let's say you're losing 16% damage, right? However, your cooldowns are longer. And DPS is what? It's damage per second. The more abilities I can throw, the more damage I can do. So cooldown indirectly is like an extra almost engraving. It's not a whole engraving, obviously. But the damage between Dominion and Salvation is not an entire engraving. It's way less than that. In fact, in a real fight scenarios, it's actually pretty even. So it's completely up to you which one of these two you prefer. The biggest selling point for Dominion is the quality of life. It's not just the cooldown that you're getting. The main thing that you're also getting is the fact that you can fill the meter inside, or sorry, you can fill the meter with your awakening skill. You don't use your as I'm trying desperately to showcase that example. You do not use the second awakening skill for damage. You're using the first awakening skill to fill your meter. You see it's miserable damage. It's barely 9 to 10 million. If you are depressed just by looking at this number, Salvation is probably your best bet. However, this is a huge quality of life because combined with a couple of bottom skills, plus awakening, right? Awakening plus all these bottom skills and one more mountain crash, and I'm already in the burst mode. That's how quickly you can get to burst mode from 0 to full. So it's literally like 10, 11, 12 seconds. It's like Shadowhunter almost, which is the biggest selling point of the minion set. You get cooldown reduction, you get a space bar, which is literally 5 seconds. This is a very, very quality of life, very neat, and I fell in love with this the second I got it. The amount of times you spacebar out of a knockback, a pushback, or any dangerous mechanic is unbelievably often. So you get a cooldown reduction on your spacebar, cooldown reduction on your abilities, you get a faster meter regeneration at the cost of running Awakening Engraving and dealing less damage with your Awakening. So these are the two differences between Salvation and Dominion. My personal recommendation for all the players who are thinking about going for Berserker's technique is to play Dominion. Why? Not because it's easier. Why? Not because of the damage. Why? Because of this thing. This thing right here. The amount of money you'll be saving building Awakening Engraving instead of, let's say, if this was like a raid captain or if this was increased mass. The amount of money you'll be saving just by putting this engraving onto your accessories is massive. Imagine if this Grudge Awakening specialization becomes Grudge Raid Captain specialization. This is the biggest reason why I fell in love with Dominion, because that allowed me to push for plus 22, and I'm working on plus 23 weapon as we're talking. This allowed me to get my first level 9 jumps. This allowed me to get my level 4 tripods. It's not just about engravings, guys. There's more to it in the build than just engravings. There's weapon quality, there's tripods, there's the quality of your accessories, there's engravings, there's gems, there's cards. There's so many things that are taken into consideration, and people always like to compare Mayhem versus Berserker's technique or Dominion versus Salvation. The way I like to compare builds is compare 100,000 gold BT versus 100,000 gold Mayhem. You can't even build Mayhem for 1,000 for 100k gold, right? And the same goes for Salvation versus Dominion. Can you even build a 5x3 if this Awakening becomes Raid Captain? It's going to be really, really, really expensive, right? So Awakening is going to save you a lot of money, and you can compensate that little lack of damage that you're getting by running one less engraving on your gems, on your tripods, on your quality, on anything you goddamn want. So my personal recommendation would be Dominion. However, if you are, again, feeling depressed looking at these numbers, feel free to run Salvation. Next up, we've talked about engravings, right? We've talked about gems. They're basically the same as Mayhem, except Bloody Rushes. The cards are self-explanatory. It's either the crit one or the LOS one, as we like to call it. Let's talk about tripods, because that's the one thing that we need to get right, because they're actually very, very important. When you first start your tripods, they're obviously all going to be basically the same. You're going to put damage tripods on your main DPS skills, and then you move from there. The only difference compared to Mayhem is the fact that this skill, called Hellblade, does not run Deadly Blow anymore. It runs Melt instead, because you're no longer going to be below half HP every single time. You're no longer Mayhem. You are a BT enjoyer. Melt is going to be the only tripod you are replacing on your main DPS skills, which is why it's pretty cheap to switch from Mayhem to BT to begin with, honestly. So you only change one tripod. After you've sorted your tripods on your main DPS skills, you want to move on to crit rate, because crit rate is very important. So you put your crit rate tripod, your vital point tripod on Red Dust, and you put a vital point tripod on your Maelstrom. These are the two crit amplifying abilities that you want to alternate between. Afterwards, you want to focus on your meter generation skills in this order. Awakening fills the most amount of your meter. We already saw this. It literally fills half of your damn meter, right? This is obviously the highest, but aside from Awakening, Windblade gives the most amount of meter, followed by Mountain Crash, followed by Maelstrom. And we can quickly give you a demonstration. As you can see, Maelstrom does essentially nothing, so you don't even need to put a focus tripod. This is literally focus tripod, well through, and level 5 focus, everything is on. This is how much meter you're getting. It's literally not that much, to a point where you can actually switch this tripod from focus to nimble movement. It'll just make the skill a lot more enjoyable to use, right? Because it's going to be a little bit more nimble or faster. But there's no real difference. It's just kind of like a min-maxing kind of thing. I just put this one. If you're going to be a Salvation player, definitely run focus, because you want every single ounce of meter generation, right, that you can get. If you're a Dominion player, you can actually pick any of these. It does not matter. However, Windblade is the highest meter generating skill. As you can see, fills quite a lot, and Mountain Crash is the second one. So you put Legendary Wealth here, you put Purple Wealth here, and here you can put literally whatever wealth rune you want. You can put a blue wealth rune, you can put a Purify, you can put Quick Protection. If you are learning a boss fight, you can put anything, literally anything. Rage, Purple Bleed, you name it. Anything you want. Same with Tempest Slash, actually. Tempest Slash have Rage, you can put literally anything. You can even mess around, you can put Conviction, Judgment on these two. They actually proc pretty damn consistently. If you want to mess around, you Conviction here, you Judgment here. I haven't messed around that much. It doesn't really change the fights for me, so I don't really care about it, but this is a viable option to put these two runes here. Otherwise, you just put any rune here as well. You can put Rage, you can put Bleed, you can put Quick Protection, whatever the hell you want. And on DPS skills, casting speed, right? Berserker is slow. Casting speed, casting speed, casting speed. Gale Wind on every single one of these three. And Bleed rune on my Red Dust, because you use it pretty damn frequently, right? Every 16 seconds or so in my case. So these are the runes. The only real difference, or the only real variance that you have in these skills would be these three skills. Because Red Dust is mandatory, this is mandatory, Finish Strike is mandatory, mandatory, mandatory. These three skills are optional, but these are considered the most optimal three skills that you can run in Berserker's technique. Because if you notice, all of these skills provide more than just one thing. This is a counter, attack speed buff, and a meter generation. This is 3 in 1. It's just a very, very good skill. And the counter is pretty damn fast. Windblade is also a meter generation skill, but it's also your movement skill. So it's 2 in 1, right? If you compare this, you can replace this obviously with something like a shoulder charge, right? But shoulder charge only is a charge, while this charges, and it also gives you meter. So it's 2 in 1. It's better. Maelstrom can be replaced with literally anything if you do not need the crit rate, but you kind of do. I mean, there are some niche areas where you don't really want to run Maelstrom. I don't know, maybe you don't have Light of Salvation, maybe you have a Lost Wind Cliff card set, maybe you have a Gunslinger in your static party, you just have a bunch of crit in your team and you don't really need Maelstrom. So you can replace the skill with Whirlwind like Saint Tone does for fun, for trolling purposes, but this in general is the optimal setup. You can replace this with Whirlwind, you can replace this with Shoulder Charge, you can replace this with a Chainsword because they're both counters, right? Which Chainsword would also give crit, right? So you can replace this and this with Chainsword, and you'll have an extra slot in here for anything you want. So you have some options, but this setup that I have is considered to be the most optimal one. This is meter generation and dash, counter, attack speed, and meter generation and meter generation plus crit rate. Very, very solid, nice abilities to use as your filler abilities. So we've talked about abilities, we've talked about runes, we've talked about engravings, stat distribution. This is the optimal one size fits all kind of a stat distribution, which includes spec and crit necklace, swiftness earring, and the rest being on spec. There are some exceptions and some things that you can think about. For example, you have a lot of crit rate. Burst mode gives 30% crit rate, Red Dust gives 33, that's 63%, right? Lost Wind Cliff set can pull it up to 70 something, and this can pull it all the way up to 90. If you're back attacking, it's 100%, and if you're putting a Gunslinger in your party, you're probably overcapping your crit rate, actually. So there are some very niche scenarios. If you're playing with Gunslinger, you don't have Light of Salvation set, you don't have other things, you can actually tone this crit down even more by putting it onto on an earring. You would have 300 crit instead of 500 crit, and you would have 500 swiftness instead of 300 swiftness, right? But this is like you tailor these kind of stats accordingly to fit your needs, right? If you don't need too much crit, you can put the crit. If you want to like pug, if you don't really have a static, if you don't have a crit and gunslinger or any crit synergy in your team, this is the optimal setup, like independent optimal setup for Berserker's technique. Some people don't even have swiftness. They go full specialization. They don't even put a swiftness earring. But swiftness earring is very relevant because if you're going to be running Raid Captain, you have 20% movement speed from your burst mode. You have 10% from your supports. You need another 10%. And this currently gives you, with the swiftness earring, roughly 6%. So you have 136% movement speed. Raid Captain is still not fully capped, but with the bracelet in the future, with the ancient accessories, with a little bit of bells and whistles, a little bit of tinkering here and there, you will cap the Raid Captain as well in the future. So this is the stat distribution for the future as well. Yeah, we've talked about stats, tripods, engravings, gems, cards. What else is there left to talk about? I guess the commonly asked questions. I guess the main question that you would want to know is, well, how quickly do you fill your meter, Xanthus? How does it feel? Does it feel sluggish? It doesn't. I can quickly show you why. If you're going to be going to Dominion, I'm not supposed to read that. Sorry, I'm trying to. My bad. You can actually start with red. This is funny because this is actually my muscle memory. In the past, I used to fill my meter with the red dust, but this is a very, very minor detail because if I'm in Inner Awakening mode, for example, my red dust is 16-second cooldown. I can fill my meter in less than 16 seconds, meaning I want my red dust to be available. I cannot use it for filling the meter. If I fill my meter in 11 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, and my cooldown is 16 seconds, I'm just sitting there for 6 seconds not doing damage, right? So this is very, very min-maxy, and this is only comes from a player who played BT literally for like, what, 2-3 months now, even more now? I don't even know how long it's been. But yeah, the way I build a meter would be buff my attack speed, buff my crit rate, use my awakening, use my bottom skills, and the second mountain crash usually fills it to full. This is basically how quickly you can fill the meter, so we can time it. Let's time this out real quick. I'm going to try to hit the timer button as quickly as possible. Maybe there's going to be like a half a second to a second delay. Keep that in mind. but attack speed, crit buff, awakening, a bunch of bottom DPS skills. 10 seconds. Literally 10 seconds. That is obviously if you hit every single skill, if the boss doesn't move, right? There's many variances, but in a perfect world, fill the meter in 10 seconds. In a less perfect world, it's 12 seconds, 15 seconds. That's why when people ask me, I always say anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds. If I by accident just missed like a Tempest Slash, well, I'm going to have to hit one more hit like this to fill my meter up. And yeah, that's basically how quickly you fill the meter. If you compare this to a Salvation one, which doesn't run Awakening, let's say, you run Raid Captain, you will quickly realize that Salvation does take a lot longer. I will probably have to... I cannot use my Awakening, right? So I'm not going to use my Awakening, but you're probably going to have to do some DPSing. You're probably going to have to do some, you know... some janky stuff, some weird stuff, you know, right? You're gonna have to do another one of these, maybe another this. It takes longer. It's basically like really, really long. I have not played Salvation, so I probably scuffed this rotation completely. People who play Salvation probably laughing at me right now, but the point is it's longer. It's a little bit less, you know, and this is obviously the best case scenario. The boss is standing still. If the boss is moving, it's going to take even longer. It's going to be even more stressful to fill the meter. If the pattern's happening, it's even worse. So it really, the Salvation will perform better in the future, and it will be a little bit better. But for the sake of simplicity, for the sake of saving money and not having to run these engravings, replacing one with Awakening, just economical standpoint, consistency standpoint, Dominion is probably better. But yeah, obviously... you're all here for the numbers as well, not just the casual talky talk. So I can obviously show you the parses. So this is me with a Dominion set. I'm gonna go on Dominion. I'm gonna put my Awakening. I pretend I do not have all the damage things. I can keep Spirit Absorption just for the whatever. I pop my Inner Awakening mode before the fight. We have a 1-minute test. Let's just go on limited cooldowns. The way I would do this testing normally is I would, you know, because I'm already in the burst mode, I would replace this with like Focus Rune, Focus Rune, Focus Rune, so I don't go out of mana to, you know, have a smooth parsing. I'll just put unlimited resources for this case. And this would be the parsing. You do your main DPS rotation, which is exactly this. Red Dust is over, you buff the crit rate with the Maelstrom, and you continue with your DPS. You wait for your Red Dust. You can pop Awakening inside the burst mode if you really want to. It doesn't do any damage, honestly. Buff your crit rate with Maelstrom again into 2 main DPS skills, and that's just how you do it. Buff the crit rate, you know, buff the crit rate. And do damage. Buff the crit rate and do damage. Now it comes a point where everything's on cooldown. That's why I'm a burst class. I need to wait. And again, I did not hit that last auto attack. It's fine. Some hits didn't crit also. But that would be essentially the test. It's 5 million. If more things would crit, if more things would hit harder, it would go. It's basically anywhere from 5.2 to 4.7, depending on the numbers. I saw 1 missed crit, so I saw only 1 missed crit so far. So it just fishing for good RNG, you know. The average is 5 million on my setup right now. A little bit more actually. That was just bad RNG. Again, the Awakening didn't crit, for example, right? There's a bit of a delay for no reason here because I'm talking. I can maybe switch the order of the abilities a little bit, because I think this is the more optimal one. And this is downtime. This is a realistic downtime. Does this fit in the thing? It should normally fit and would be higher than 4.8. But yeah, you can see a bunch of parsing. I can keep going and going and going. You can keep seeing the numbers. Fishing for good RNG. I've seen 5.2s plenty of times. 5.2 and a half even. It all depends on the crits and the numbers you're seeing. Maybe this one will crit this time. It does, so the number will be probably higher now. And yeah, these are your average numbers with my build. Your average Andy numbers. I can maybe do some Windblade, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, there you go. If you fish for better RNG, it just goes up dramatically. So a little bit of Windblade, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Just anywhere from 4.7 to 5.2 million would be the parse for Dominion. And then we have Salvation, if you guys are curious to see Salvation numbers. Well, sure. We have Salvation here. We switch Awakening for a DPS engraving. Like Great Captain. And we test it again. And the other thing we need is we need the bad boy. The bad boy. There you go. So before every boss fight you start with 20 of this. You kill some trash mobs. There you go. And the reason why I said increased mass is viable for Salvation as an engraving, because at 20 stacks you get this 10% attack speed, which can completely nullify the increased masses drawback as an engraving. So, but yeah, this would be Berserker's technique parsing with Salvation. And you can see the rotation start is going to be basically the same. The numbers are much higher now, right? We're going from 11 million-ish to almost 13 million on Finish Strike. But the downtime is higher. Much higher. But you compensate that with a non-crit Awakening. So this is going to be obviously a very bad test, because but the rotation you see is very similar. And the reason why Salvation Tricksin sucks for testing is because, look, my red dust is on 10-second cooldown, 8-second cooldown, and it aligns perfectly with the end of the test. So all my burst abilities are coming off cooldown, but I can't test it anymore, right? So now look what happens if I increase the test just by literally, let's say 10 seconds, you know, all of a sudden, and I'm going to fish for the RNG, for the crits. It's probably going to be a much bigger number than 4.7, right? And that's why I hate testing Tricksin in general, because it doesn't really show anything, honestly. Good Windblade here. There you go. 51 million this time. And again, it's about fishing for the RNG. But now notice, as I extended the test by 10 seconds, look, I will be able to use one more rotation right before the test ends. So it will be much, much higher numbers. Right? Like, this is not even fair anymore, is it? You know? 5.7. That's without the second awakening hit critting. It was like 3 mil instead of the 11 mil. So again, you can fish. I've seen 6 million actually. I've tested this many times. I've seen 6 million in salvation tricks, with this kind of cheesing and whatever. But it's anywhere from 4.7 to 6, and the only way you find out is how good you are at the game, because you can miss an awakening skill, you can miss a crit, you can miss a skill, you can miss a bloody rush. Like if you do this in a fight, you're gonna feel very sad. So yeah, you have two different playstyles. That's why I prefer Dominion myself, because it's just a little bit more consistent. Like even if I miss some of my abilities, I'm not gonna feel as bad, simply because I have better cooldowns. I have this inner awakening mode, right? So I just have better cooldowns on my skills, and I can actually, I'm not as punished playing BT as I would be by playing Salvation and missing a single ability or something. And yeah, in every single boss encounter, Burst is just king. The more you outgear the content, the better it becomes. And I think I've covered basically everything you guys need to know. I've covered Dominion versus Salvation. One's more consistent, one's more burstier. I've talked about engravings, right? Again, quick recap, I guess, for those who want like a TLDR. For Dominion, for Salvation, you would run 5 DPS engravings, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 DPS engravings. You can replace Cursed Doll with increased mass, because Salvation nullifies the downgrade, or the downside of the mass increase engraving. And if you were to run Awakening, you would go Dominion set, you would basically build this. It's very, very simple. So engravings are very simple, gems are the same, cards are the same, skills are the same. Dominion runs Chain of Vengeance, Salvation runs Berserker's Fury. Those are the only differences between the two in terms of skills. And the runes. The only really honorable thing about tripods that I would like to mention is, like I said, Windblade is the highest meter generating skill. You want this to 5 if possible. I have it to 4. You want this tripod as a focus tripod first. This is the most important tripod. Another thing that I can tell you is Windblade is usually used as a mobility ability. However, if you change this tripod from Windswift to Squall, it becomes an absolute monster in terms of filling your meter in Salvation mode. Because you probably noticed, in Salvation mode it's pretty damn hard, right, to fill your meter compared to Dominion. But this Squall tripod is insane for filling the meter. You can see just how much it filled. It's like 2 of these is like Chain of Vengeance, almost. A little bit less, but like 2 of these is almost the same as Chain of Vengeance. And we've tested this with some of my friends. They actually spent some money on the tripods to test this out. But no, if you have a level 5 Squall or a level 1 Squall, there is no difference in meter generation. The only thing that is relevant is getting the focus rune to level 5. So if I had this rune to level 5, probably these 2 would probably be the same as Chain of Vengeance Awakening skill, which is just nuts if you think about it, right? We can even compare it. So if you go this, and if we put this maybe to maximum, where is my Windblade? If I max my Windblade, I am pretty sure 2 of these, that's 1, that's 2. That's like half, right? That's roughly like half of the meter. You can see the meter. And now if I just awaken, yeah, it's insane, isn't it? So if you're Salvation, you can really consider this. I don't know why most people prefer the other tripod in Salvation mode. Like, sure, I guess you want the mobility, but if you are a skilled player, if you get to a point where you don't really need mobility, because, like, let's be honest, how many times you're gonna die because you didn't have a charge or a Windblade off cooldown? Like, it's really rare that happens. So this with a Squall tripod is the absolute highest meter generation skill. It's just another honorary mention that I wanted to talk about. And again, you can replace these 3 skills with anything you really want. Like Mountain Crash can be replaced with Chainsword, and this can be replaced with, I don't know, like if you watch Saint Owen stream, he has a Whirlwind, because why not? Like, it's not optimal. This is the optimal setup, but you can have fun. You can have Whirlwinds, you can have whatever the hell you want. You can have Crime Hazard, for God's sake. Like, I don't know, put this skill if you really want to. It does not matter. As long as you have enough crit rate from your party synergies, your cards, your stats, your whatever, you'll be more than fine. And that's basically all that I wanted to cover, honestly. I've talked about the stats and the crit, how you can actually have 300 crit here. I've talked about everything. That's it. The lecture's done. So obviously, if you have any questions, please leave a like, please leave a comment down below. I will definitely read the comments. I will definitely answer to your questions. I would be very happy if this video will be pinned to the main official Lost Ark Berserker chat channel, where people can just come over and, you know, and read about it, listen to it, and get some information about it, because this is probably everything you need to know about Berserkers Technique Mayhem. If you're going to go Awakening route, if you're going to go Dominion route, you're going to save a lot of money, meaning that you'll be able to spend more money on tripods, on gems, on weapon quality, on accessory quality, etc, etc, etc. So I would highly recommend Dominion. However, if you feel depressed and you don't want this, go Salvation. That's it. Thank you for watching, and yeah, I'll upload some more footage in the future. See you.